Everybody got quiet, so that must mean it's time to start. Huh? Well, it doesn't work quite that way. Okay, can you hear all right? Good. All right. Well, anyway, welcome. Thank you for coming to the award ceremony for the first ever Free University of River Landing Creative Writing Competition. I'm Walt Pilcher, and I'm privileged to be the administrator for the competition. And what we're going to do today is to recognize everyone who entered and also to honor the winners with certificates of appreciation. We had a total of 20 entries in 4 categories: short story, poem, essay, and memoir. And we think the competition was a great success, especially given that this was the first time we've ever done it. So first, I want to start off by recognizing the person whose idea this was. After taking the FURL creative writing course, either last spring or last fall, I can't remember which was called Right Here, Right Now, it was Nelda Tawes who said, "Hey, why don't we have a creative writing contest?" And voila, we did. So stand up, Nell, and take a bow. And thank you. Okay. Oh, by the way, put your phones on silent, please. So that would be good. One of the objectives of the Right Here, Right Now writing course was really just to stir up the urge to write, and then to do so. So that's really been the spirit of this competition too. And of course, it wasn't as simple as voila, but the FURL work group under Jim Killackey's leadership, and they approved the idea. The staff members, including Cindy Hawks and Brian Stroud and Sydney Sparing there, that jumped in to make it happen, and they've worked very hard on this. We wanted to establish a high standard of excellence, even though the simple idea was to get people stirred up to try to write. So we did have a schedule drawn up. We had some guidelines drawn up. Allison Walker of the English department at faculty at High Point University, who you'll meet in a few minutes, she graciously agreed to be our highly qualified judge. And so that it all finally came together, and this is kind of the culmination of it, and we're very pleased with it. Now, I said you'd get to meet Allison in a minute, but first I would like to introduce our august FURL facilitator. I call him the Dean of FURL, and that's Jim Killackey, to give us the FURL perspective and to introduce our judge.
Thank you, Walt. Thank you, thank you. The title Dean sounds pretty decent, but maybe, is there a vice chancellorship in the offing, or? Good afternoon and welcome. It is absolutely thrilling that we have actually arrived at this day. And I was sitting yesterday wondering what I'm supposed to say by way of a FURL endorsement. I'm not sure I've ever endorsed anything, and of remarks. And I thought you might actually have an interest in just simply how we got to this day. Carol and Walt moved in here in May of 1920. They really are senior citizens. In May of 2020, and they spent their first 2 weeks in quarantine. And Walt said just a little while ago when I was checking this date that was actually terrific, because it allowed them to get unpacked and on everything else without interruptions of events like this and other things. I got to meet them sometime in early 2021, and Walt came up with, as he mentioned, what I thought was a fabulous title for a writing course: Write, W-R-I-T-E, Here, Right Now. And as you've heard, in the course of that, Nelda came up with her brilliant idea to have something like a writing competition. The second edition of the course happened in the spring of 2022, and the idea for the writing thing had come up in the fall semester, and so thanks to Cindy Hawkes, who made a connection at High Point University, we had the great and good fortune to get connected with Allison. We met Allison, Walt and I, and the only disappointment I had in that meeting is that I've been poking around with a bit of writing for several years that I keep procrastinating on. And there's several people in this room who keep beating up on me to get beyond the procrastination. And I thought, well, I could lift a piece out of this and enter this thing myself. And one of the things that came up at that very first meeting was that the writing should be relatively recent, not something that you drag down from the shelf and submit it to something like this. So I thought, okay, that lets me off the hook for trying to polish this thing up for a while. So in May and June of this year, we had submissions, and as Walt said, this was a new event, so we weren't quite sure what the response was going to be like. And it was positively thrilling to have 20 different submissions from, I believe, 16 different authors. Allison took the first part of the summer and served as adjudicator and sent the results over. We did not want to conflict with the River Landing Olympics and a lot of other stuff that was going on in September, so we ended up with this date to have this celebration. So from FURL, there are some very special things to pass along. Again, to Nelda for the suggestion, because if she hadn't have made it, this probably wouldn't have happened. So Nelda, thank you. To Walt for the amazing amount of work he has put in. I have never seen a program, just this physical program like this, so elegantly done. And when you see the anthology afterwards, there's an anthology here for everyone. I think you'll be more than impressed with the sort of background work that's gone into putting this together. Allison for adjudicating, and not only adjudicating, but supporting with incredible energy and enthusiasm this whole effort. And then Sydney for her technical support in putting, I mean, Walt's quite a genius in putting this stuff together. And then Sydney is an equal genius in getting it on paper in such an elegant fashion. And Sydney, thank you for that. River Landing has come through big time in terms of supporting not only FURL, but in supporting this program and the materials that have been produced by it. And we certainly want to acknowledge that support. I've had the great honor from time to time of being in an introducing role, and today it's just a very special honor because Allison, the minute we met her, said, yes, this is a great idea. Yes, I know what I'm doing. Yes, I've done this before. And yes, it'll work. So thank you, Allison. As Walt mentioned, she went to Wake Forest, and then she had the incredible good taste of getting a degree from Appalachian State, which is very close to my heart, and then wandered off to Alaska. And so if any of you want to talk about Alaska afterwards, I'm sure Allison will be delighted to entertain you. Her interdisciplinary research interests include narrative medicine, medical humanities, literary Darwinism, undergraduate research and creative projects, service learning, scholarship of teaching and learning, digital humanities, empathy, and beekeeping. And in her spare time, if you can imagine, this woman, I'm not sure how she has spare time, but she claims to enjoy running barefoot with her husband, harvesting honey from her backyard bees, playing the violin with her daughter, and volunteering as a vet tech for the Feral Cat Assistance Program of Guilford County. Allison, welcome formally to River Landing, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I want to thank you for inviting me here into your space, into your home, to share in the joy of creativity. So I mentioned to several of you as we were talking beforehand, right? It's the creative process that gives us that energy and that passion and that inspiration, right? It doesn't matter whether anyone reads it at all, right? It doesn't matter whether the final product is worthy of an award or not, right? It's the process that rejuvenates us, that invigorates us. And so I just want to thank all of you for sharing your passions and your creativity with me. I was overwhelmed with the diversity of entries in this contest. Given that it's our first attempt, you know, it could have been easily an epic fail, to use my daughter's social media term, right? And here we had all of these entries, and we had historical fiction, and we had, I don't know if you know it, but we had imagist poetry, post-confessional poetry, traditional rhyming poetry. We had essays from philosophy and science. We had memoirs and travelogues. We had humorists, right? I laughed out loud. We had people playing around with structure in really creative ways. And so I was just really, it's a testament to all of you that there was such a diversity within these entries. And I just want to thank you for the privilege of getting to read them. Yeah? So I want to start us off with a poem. It's not my own. It's by Langston Hughes, because it just reminds us of the power of creativity. And it's called The Dream Keeper by Langston Hughes. Bring me all of your dreams, you dreamers. Bring me all your heart melodies, that I may wrap them in a blue cloud cloth, away from the too rough fingers of the world. So I just wanted us to start off with a little bit of poetry. That's my jam when I have spare time. That's what I like to write. And again, I want to just give a round of applause to everyone, to all of our entries before we proceed to the awards ceremony, because it took tremendous courage for you to take that risk, that leap, and to share your work with someone else. And I hope that this is just the spark of a journey, and that you'll continue to write and you'll continue to share that work with others, and hopefully we'll do this again next year. Yeah? Okay, so a round of applause for everyone, all of our entrants. Okay. Oh, wait, I have to do this. You know, that social media thing that all those young people do these days. But what I need from you is I need a shout out. Can you say, "Right on, River Landing"?
Right on, River Landing.
Oh, one more time. I need it louder.
Right on, River Landing.
Thank you. Okay, let's take a photo too. Hold on. I'm not good at this stuff. This is what my daughter does.
Ooh,
Right?
major selfie.
Yay. Oh, I'm left-handed. Ready? Cheese. Okay. We can proceed now. You ready?
All right.
Excellent.
Are you?
I am.
Okay. We're going to be on Facebook, I'll bet. And it's going to go viral. You don't have to get up yet. We're going to do the other thing first.
Oh, sure.
Okay. Okay, so before we formally present the awards and hear the readings by the first place winners, what we want to do is to recognize all the entrants who are here. I know some of them are away on the Tennessee trip or whatever, and of course we hope they're having a wonderful time. most of these folks that I'm going to ask to stand up in a minute had winning entries, but some didn't. We had not as many, in a couple of categories, we had not as many entries as there were prizes. And so you'd think, oh, well, gee, they had to pick so-and-so because there weren't enough entries. And, well, oh, yeah, right, we did. But I have to tell you that I read every one of the entries myself, though I'm not the judge, but I like reading other people's things. And as a writer myself, I thought they were all excellent. I really did. And I think our judge, Allison, would agree. And I think she had a tough job, even though she's very enthusiastic and very good at it. And maybe it wasn't as hard for her as it would have been for me. But everything was really good. As I said, we had 20 entrants from 16 people, which was 15 residents and 1 staff member. And before we get to the formal awards part, as I said, I want to recognize all the entrants who are here. So when I call your name, if you just stand and remain standing until I've got everybody, and then we'll get to the formal awards part. So, and these are not necessarily in any particular order. John Scroggins, if you would stand. Rebecca Dickerson. Kathy Coe, who had 2 winning entries. Mentioned Lou Witt. Now, she's not here, I know. She's in Tennessee, I think. Maurice Horn, I don't think he made it. I didn't see him. Okay. And Jim Morgan, also not here. I think he's in Tennessee. Jack Barry, Sandy Gray, Carol Ingram, Nelda Tawes, Bill DeMue. Where's Bill? There he is. Caroline McGuinn, Clyde Cook. There's Clyde. I saw him come in. Kathy Rickard. I'm not sure she's here. Evelyn Cars. Not sure she's here. And Wiz Horner. I know he's not here. So, thanks to all the entrants. You can be seated now. Now, we're going to do the presentation of awards by category. And how this is going to work is I'll call your name, and if you could please come up on the stage if you're able to, and receive your framed certificate of achievement from Allison, and also a specific gift that Allison has prepared to remind us of High Point University. And that's a very gracious thing that she's done there with those. Then remain up here for a moment while our photographer gets a picture of you. And maybe those will go on Facebook too, who knows. So, ready to go? All right. And after this, we will have readings by the first place winners in each of the 4 categories. All right, first place, John Scroggins with his short story, Old Pete. Second place short story, Rebecca Dickerson with A Letter for Miss Emma. Okay. Poetry. First place, Kathy Coe with her poem, Living Lingering. I'll mention the second place and third place winners. Second place was Lou Witt, and I know she's not here, with her poem Coastal Ponderings. And third place was Maurice Horn with his poem Recompense. An honorable mention, Jim Morgan, for his inspirations from childhood through college. And as I said, he's not here either. All right, in the essay category, first place, Jack Barry for Miscellaneous Musings on Reality. In second place for essay is Kathy Coe. On her essay is called What is Sacred?
get your steps in when you're a prolific writer. Congratulations. Thank you so much.
Another picture to your grandma. 1, 2, 3. They're not going to
And in third place for essay, Sandy Gray, with his piece called Attention, People Skills Matter. So,
One, two, three. Thank you.
okay. In the memoir category, first place goes to Carol Ingram for her story, Horror in the Hybrids.
Our humorist. Yeah.
I'm glad you thought it was funny.
Good stuff.
1, 2, 3. Perfect.
Second place in the memoir category, Nelda Tawes, with her piece entitled, What Are the Chances?
This one was hard to believe.
1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Third place in the memoir category, Bill DeMue, with A Day Among the Irish.
Hello, James. You're very personable for a little kid.
It's the red hair, it's the Irish bit of
Oh, okay.
1, 2, 3. Thank you.
No, you brought it to life. I've just recently, right before COVID, I just traveled to Ireland right before COVID.
Oh, you did?
Yes, and your story brought it all back to life.
Oh, wonderful.
Allison said she traveled to Ireland just before COVID, and his story brought it all back to life. So,
With Root?
yeah, we're done. Go away. And then the honorable mention goes to Caroline McGuinn for her memoir, Blow Winds Blow.
There we go. Congratulations.
1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Perfect.
Okay, that takes care of the winners, and how about a round of applause for all of them? Now, one of the pièces de résistances, if I'm pronouncing that anywhere close to correctly, we'd like to have the first place winners read from their work. And we'll go again in the order of the categories. So first up, reading his short story, Old Pete, is John Scroggins.
Thank you, Jim, Walt, Allison, Nelda. In my view, this is exactly the kind of things we need to be doing at River Landing. I was happy to participate. Old Pete. Sue Ellen was sitting alone in the kitchen with a half cup of coffee getting cold in front of her. She always got up about 30 minutes before Joe to get coffee and breakfast ready. Breakfast was usually a simple affair. When she heard Joe at the top of the stairs, she grabbed his plate off the top of the oven and put it on the table. Joe came down the stairs with each footstep making a stomping sound like he was heavy, which he wasn't. People referred to Joe as a tall drink of water. He stood 6'3", lean and wiry. He dressed like most men that lived in the North Texas farm country: boots, jeans, a long-sleeve plaid cotton shirt. His face and hands showed the wrinkles and calluses of the sun and the wind. When he got to the bottom of the stairs, he smiled. "Something smells good." They had been married 27 years, and Sue Ellen always appreciated Joe's compliments. "I warmed up some of the cornbread we had last night." He didn't say anything, but went to his end of the table and sat down in front of a plate with 2 pretty large squares of cornbread, a tall glass of milk, and a long teaspoon. When he was settled, Sue Ellen set a hot cup of black coffee next to his plate. She took her coffee and sat across from Joe. She liked to sit and talk with Joe, and then she would have something small to eat later. He took one of the cornbread squares and crumbled it between both hands into the glass of milk. After he stirred it up a bit, he put the other square in. Sue Ellen's cornbread was just as good for breakfast as it was for supper. They lived in a small 2-story farmhouse that had belonged to her parents, who had passed away several years ago. It used to be a farm, but now they just leased the several hundred acres to a couple of larger farmers and kept the house and 2 acres to live on. Their place was like a small oasis with giant oak trees towering over the house. Everything for miles around was mesquite trees and cactus. Their nearest neighbors were about a mile away. That suited them just fine. They had 2 children. The oldest, Bobby, was in the Marines and stationed overseas. He was assigned to a place named Qatar, near Saudi Arabia. Bobby pronounced it Qatar. He had already made corporal, so Joe and Sue Ellen were very proud. The younger was Jane, an 18-year-old tomboy going to a community college in Wichita Falls, about 30 miles away. Bobby wrote them a letter every week or so. He asked about each of them and never failed to ask about old Pete at the end of his letter. He'd been Bobby's dog since he was about 9, when old Pete was a pup. After Joe finished his coffee, he said, "Well, I guess I'll head on down to the farmer's market before all the good produce is gone. Remind me what all you wanted?" And she said, "Get 4 tomatoes from that same guy we got them from last week. I want 1 packet of mixed beans and 1 small ham hock. If the sweet corn looks good, get 4 ears. Now, Joe, you got to lift a little bit of the shuck and smell the corn. If it smells sweet, it's probably going to taste sweet." Joe shoved away from the table, stood up, and reached over to the hat rack by the back door, grabbed his old John Deere hat. The bill was frayed and it had a few stitches in the back to hold it together. As he reached for the screen door, he said, "I think I'll take old Pete." Sue Ellen stood up. "Joe, I wish you wouldn't take the dog. He's old, it's going to be hot, and he can't jump in and out of the truck like he used to, which means you've got to lift him." I know, but he needs to get his ears in the wind now and then." Old Pete was lying on the back porch, wide awake. He knew Joe would be coming out soon, and hopefully, wherever Joe went, he'd get to tag along. Old Pete was a large black lab with a little gray on his snout and ears. He wasn't full-blooded, but people in these parts just wanted a well-behaved dog that was big enough to keep a fox out of the chicken coop and drifters out of the yard. When old Pete saw Joe coming out the door, he got up as quickly as possible, which was not that fast. First came the front legs, then the back legs, tail wagging. Joe reached down and rubbed him behind the ear and asked, "Pete, do you want to ride in the truck?" Well, old Pete knew what the word truck meant. He was beside himself, jumping around, and then off the porch, leading Joe to the truck. Joe let the tailgate down, and old Pete put his front paws on the tailgate, but that was as far as he could go. Joe wrapped his arms around both front and back legs and lifted him into the truck. And then he said, "Damn, Pete, you've gained some weight." The drive to the farmer's market was less than a half a mile, and Joe periodically looked in his side view mirror to see old Pete's head in the wind with his tongue sticking out and his ears flapping. Joe smiled to himself because he knew old Pete was enjoying every second. They were about 2 miles out from the market when he looked to the right side of the road and saw the old tobacco barn just off the road. Most of these barns have been torn down or fallen on their own from wind, rain, and old age. Joe wanted to find a few boards to do a wood project for Sue Ellen. He had in mind a box with a couple of drawers so she could organize her sewing stuff. Joe pulled over just off the road but well out of traffic and slowed down to a dusty stop. It was less than 100 yards to the barn, so he figured it would not be too much for the old dog at a slow pace. It was July, so he would go slow. As they started, old Pete stayed right by Joe's side. Joe liked that. There was a barbed wire fence they would have to cross, but the two of them had crossed many barbed wire fences in the past. Pete held back to let his master go through first. Barbed wire fences in this area was just like this one. 3 strands. You just push down on the center strand, lift your leg, head, and body through, trying not to get anything hung up, and then out on the other side. Joe was right there, right leg through, head through, and swinging his body through when the diamondback rattler started his warning. It was a heart stopper. The giant snake was less than 2 feet from Joe's face. The only thing moving was the tail of his rattlers. His black eyes were fixed on Joe's face, so close. Joe was frozen when he heard a loud, woeful growl and a whine come from old Pete as he charged through the fence and grabbed the big rattler. Joe was thrown back to the friendly side of the wire, landing roughly on his shoulder, with his John Deere hat firmly attached to the top strand of wire. He turned to see the horrific scene of old Pete making a cloud of dust while thrashing the snake back and forth. The snake had managed to bite the dog just under the eye and was somehow still hanging on. Joe sprang to his feet and watched the scene in horror. The dog had managed to get his head and front legs through the wire, with his back legs and tail still on the other side. The bottom line of barbed wire was right under Pete's belly, and blood was all over the ground. It seemed like a long time, but everything happened in only about a minute. The snake was dead, but still hanging loosely from the dog's jaws. In one motion, Joe reached through the fence, grabbed the snake, and flung it into the tall grass. Old Pete was breathing hard and wheezing with every breath. He did not attempt to rise. Joe went to his knees and pulled old Pete back through the wire. Joe just sat there and rubbed the dog's head, and when he got him through, his belly was bloody, his head was grossly swollen, and Joe didn't want to move him anymore. He talked to the dog just like he was human. He whispered, "Pete, do you remember when you and Bobby jumped that old mother skunk down by the creek? She got you boys good. Bobby thought he was going blind, and you kept going around in circles trying to get the breeze in your face. I never laughed so hard in all of my life." Old Pete's attempt to wag his tail when he heard the name Bobby was feeble, and it didn't last. Old Pete died right there. Joe just sat there in the dust with his hand on the dog's shoulder. A few cars came by. Some slowed down, but nobody stopped. He finally got the dog back in the truck and turned around, headed for home. On the way, he cried a little. Sue Ellen was sweeping the kitchen when she heard Joe's truck and then looked out to see him pulling into the yard. He didn't drive up close to the porch as usual, but he stopped in the shade under the old oak tree. When he got out, she wondered, "Now where is his hat?" Joe walked straight to the back porch and into the kitchen and stopped. He softly said, "Old Pete got bit by a rattler, and he's dead. If it weren't for him, I would have gotten bit myself. He saved my life. It's hot. I'm going to get a shovel and bury him now." Sue Ellen bit her lower lip. She didn't cry, but she took a couple of deep breaths. She looked at Joe and could see the tear tracks on his dusty face. She said, "Joe, We've had old Pete for 14 years. I'm going to help bury him. Joe didn't say anything. He just gave a nod and turned for the door. Midway across the porch, she took Joe's hand. He stopped and turned to face her. "You know I'm going to cry," he said. Sue Ellen looked straight ahead and said, "Me too. It's going to be hard to tell Bobby."
Very powerful story, John. Thank you. Next, we have Kathy Coe reading her poem, Living, Lingering.
John, that was a heartbreaker. Thank you. I want to thank all the people up here, but also all the people in the NPR today. It looks as if we might have the beginnings of a writer's colony here, which is a wonderful thing. Thanks. Living, lingering. Sunrise, the day after the longest day of the year. Din of mowers fading as I follow my lengthened shadow down the tree-lined path. I pause, draw in oxygen breathed by oaks and poplars standing in tall and wordless groves, not unlike a Quaker meeting. Surrounded, I too become quiet. My route is crossed by a mother and 5 compliant ducklings, padding their way to breakfast beneath some neighbor's overflowing feeders. Here lies the body of a pine felled by last week's storm, a squirrel scavenging among its still supple branches. I sense a twinge of grief. Back home, I plant 4 pentas, said by the book to draw butterflies. Hoping to brighten a garden struggling with summer heat, I mix the living among the lingering. Then retire inside to Bach, who walked this earth fully 3 centuries back, whose orderly phrases still quicken my now resting pulse.
Thank you, Kathy. Next, reading excerpts from his first place winning essay, Miscellaneous Musings on Reality, Jack Barry.
Let's see if we can do this. See if that works. Thank you, Walt, and thank you to everyone who made this wonderful event happen. And I agree with Kathy. I think we may have the beginnings of a writer's colony here. Walt introduced me to read excerpts, which is what we're doing here, because my essay is rather long, and rather than submit you to the agony of sitting through 15 minutes of me reading something that probably wouldn't interest everyone anyway, excerpts is what I've got. The essay, it was difficult to do because the essay is built as it goes along, so pulling out just, say, 1 paragraph and sharing it with you wouldn't make any sense. So I took little pieces, put them together, hoping to maintain some continuity and not lose the ideas that I was trying to present. So here we go. Miscellaneous musings on reality. For most of my adult life, when considering the nature of reality in the universe, I have generally looked to the science of physics for answers, thinking that an understanding of matter and energy on the most basic level would reveal ultimate reality. Now, upon reflecting on other considerations which will be developed in this essay, I find myself rethinking that approach as being too limited in scope. Einstein's theory of special relativity shows us the equivalence of mass and energy, their proportionality being a function of the speed of light squared. In fact, physicists often express the mass of various elementary particles in units of energy. So it seems that matter and energy are simply two forms of the same stuff. One might think of the elementary particles as essentially very highly concentrated quantities of some form of energy. This is probably a gross oversimplification, but it seems to be a reasonable way to think of such things without having to understand the very complex mathematics underpinning the theory. So while there is obviously a great deal of information to be found here, it still feels a bit vague and unsatisfactory when it comes to describing the ultimate intrinsic nature of matter. And more importantly, it also completely ignores what I consider to be another aspect of reality, that of consciousness. Science has done a masterful job of understanding the behavior of the most elementary bits of matter, even though the intrinsic nature of the matter in the universe is still rather vague, at least to my thinking. And admittedly, there are still some major unanswered questions in the quest for complete understanding of the physical world, such as the nature of dark matter and dark energy. But I have confidence that these questions will eventually be answered. On the other hand, science has yet to deal effectively with the question of if and how consciousness, however one may define it, should be incorporated into the picture of the ultimate reality of the universe. In my view, a complete understanding of only the physical aspect of the universe without somehow incorporating consciousness into the picture would be an incomplete representation of ultimate reality. As for the so-called physical world, physicists have been working for over a century to reconcile the differences between the two great theories of 20th century physics, general relativity and quantum mechanics, each of which breaks down in the physical realm in which the other accurately depicts the behavior of the physical world. Physicists are working toward the goal of developing a single theory that will unify general relativity and quantum mechanics into a single grand theory that will explain everything in the physical universe, and in the process, clarify our understanding of the four fundamental forces. Such a theory is sometimes referred to as a theory of everything. As growing research into the nature of consciousness and its relationship with the physical world begins to yield more results, I expect that consciousness will come to be thought of as simply another fundamental aspect of reality. I believe that a basic, but even more difficult task for 21st century science will be the development of a theory which will incorporate consciousness into our understanding of the fundamental nature of the universe, thereby moving the mind from the realm of metaphysics to physics. Perhaps the grandest and truest theory of everything will be one that incorporates and reconciles general relativity, quantum mechanics, and consciousness into a single unified understanding of the universe and hence ultimate reality. While it is unlikely that this will be accomplished within my lifetime or even the lifetimes of my grandchildren, the possibility of its eventual achievement is exhilarating and gives me hope for the future.
Thank you, Jack. Personally, I find that very interesting. It's, I think there's the whole idea of consciousness should be a part of all this, plus the whole idea of quantum mechanics. I think there's something there, but anyway. Now, reading her first place memoir, Carol Ingram, Horror in the Hybrids. I can fix that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everybody, for coming and supporting all the writers we have at River Landing. I'm really impressed to see all these faces. Okay, mine is Horror in the Hybrids, and I'm not sure if I belong in this company, but most people don't know the joys of living in the hybrid apartments at River Landing. However, danger lurks in the hidden recesses of the building. I'm talking about the elevators. They look so innocent. Push a button, hear the cube ascending, watch the doors glide open, and then they trap you. I've had the pleasure of being in the elevator when it closes and traps you for what seems like an eternity. My elevator partner, known from now on as EP, claims we were in there for 2 hours. I'm not saying she's wrong, but panic changes the perception of time. First, you pick up the phone, conveniently placed in the elevator just for situations like this. They really want you to have faith in the machine. The phone is answered. Your call will be answered in the order in which it was received. You start to wonder just how many others are stuck in this particular brand of elevator. Next, you pound on the walls and doors, hoping someone will hear you. No one answers. How could everyone be out? Now some of the residents use the 2 flights of steps in the building, but keep in mind this is a senior living building and not all residents moved here to walk the steps from the 3rd floor. So someone should be trying to leave the building to eat at the big house because their food is always available. All at once you realize you have your cell phone in your pocket and try to call someone, anyone. This realization hits you. There is no cell phone reception in the elevator, but you can text. Everyone you ever heard of gets a text from you. When you finally released from the prison you were in, you get calls from people in faraway cities because the text went off in a rush when you were released. Now the panic starts to set in. The EP looks around and tells you there is no release panel in the ceiling. Even if there were, both of you are too short to reach the 9-foot height. The power of prayer sets in about now, and your prayers are answered. The firemen arrive. I hope they are not too disappointed because it is not a fire. Instead, it is 2 women in a state of panic and treat the firemen like the rescuing heroes they are. Since that time, the elevators in my building have gone out 15 times, and yes, we are all counting. Now I know what to do in case of being stuck in the elevator. I get on my phone and go to YouTube. The best advice is to remain calm, like that is going to happen. Positive thinking is also helpful. Other advice is to make yourself comfortable and get some sleep because you are probably tired from all the energy you have used trying to get out. What you don't want to do is read about all the people who have perished in elevators.
Thank you, Carol. Let's have a round of applause for all of our first place winners who were so courageous as to be reading to us today. Thank you. Now I want to turn it back over to Jim for what we are calling a special presentation.
Thank you, Walt. For those of you that were here at the beginning, I hope you now have a little bit deeper understanding of what I said to the effect of what an absolute joy it is to be here today and to have this event. There are 2 people who've arrived since that time, and I want to acknowledge them and tell them that we did acknowledge your departments in the process. But Lisa Waite is our esteemed Associate Director, and Cindy Hawks is our esteemed Director of Residence Services. And we acknowledge both your groups in the beginning, but now that you're here, thank you so much for helping make this possible. The other great and lovely task that I have to wrap up my part of the day is get my glasses so I can see. There's an aging process that goes along with living here too. This is another certificate, and it says, the Free University of River Landing Certificate of Appreciation, 10/12/2022. Distinguished Judge of the 2022 FURL Creative Writing Competition, Allison Walker, BA, MFA, Director of Service Learning and Instructor of English, High Point University. With our heartfelt thanks and deepest appreciation from the FURL Facilitator and Tom Smith, Executive Director of River Landing. Allison.
Thank you so much. Oh, yeah. All of you get to do it. Both of you. Walt, you get over here too.
Yes.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
It's been my pleasure. And again, we're going to do this.
Yes, thank you so much, Allison. The last thing on the list is, you'll be happy to know, if you don't already know, we have what we're calling soundings over there, which is an anthology of all the winning entries. So you'll be able to read all of Jack's treatise, as well as the ones that were not read. So yeah, there it is. Sydney worked very hard on that as well. There's 2 short stories, there's 4 poems, there's 3 essays and 4 memoirs, and the point is to showcase all the winning entries in this year's competition for your reading enjoyment, which I think you'll find it. We call it soundings, which maybe sound like a kind of a funny name, but that's the original idea of taking measures of depth in a body of water, taking soundings. And it's been expanded really in general use to a probe or a test or a sampling of opinion, intention, or information, and with the obvious connotation of hearing what River Landing writers have to say. So that's why we named it that. I think you'll find that the 13 works in that collection are about as varied as they are interesting. Each one, as I said before, is excellent in its own way, and so please pick up a copy on your way out. Also, the marketing department has graciously provided enough official River Landing ballpoint pens to take. So take one of those, and just to remind you that writing is fun. Okay. And finally, again, a sincere thanks to everyone who's had a hand in this competition: Sydney, Brian, Cindy, and everybody who entered the competition, because everyone has been really enthusiastic in the way they've gone about this. And with that, we're done. Feel free to stick around, meet Allison if you haven't met her already. Congratulate all the fine River Landing authors, and have a wonderful afternoon.